I was asked by Natasha about this, and I thought about my experience kind of being in school, and hopefully you guys can relate to this as well. One of the things is not overt racism that still persists today, but actually the kind of persistence of microaggressions within school. And that's what it is like very small things that are just, they kind of annoy you, they irritate you, but they're not so overt that you can challenge them. And kind of the things that I brought up would be obviously the question of where you're really from. Firstly, it can be quite intrusive and uncomfortable to be asked this question. I think it's more relevant, especially because of recent political tensions. So we look at conflicts within the Middle East, throughout the world, and the rise in Islamophobia, anti-Semitism has risen in light of these conflicts. So sometimes not telling the truth or where you are actually from can be a form of survival or retaining your control over your own story, rather than being whitewashed and the erasure of your own culture. And I think it's important to see it as that in some ways, to protect yourself by not always opening up totally where you're from, but rather how you want to be presented, how you want your story to be presented, and where you're from and your heritage and your ethnicity. If you're on the receiving end of that conversation and you've asked just because you're curious and you want to know about it, I think the best way to think about how in the future is really to be, not to challenge that, to kind of accept that someone has decided to retain that, and rather than question their name and be like, you don't look like what your name is, or you don't look like where I think you're from, accept what they've said. And I think that that's the best way to approach these kind of conversations, and I hope that that idea can become more common spread. The idea as well is something that I wanted to talk about quite uniquely, is the experience of first generation, children of first generation kind of immigrants within this country. I think it's quite important because compared to white British students who may have been in the country have had family in this country for decades, have had family members in this country for decades, they tend to have a lot more knowledge of the system and how to apply to university, how to get a driving license, and things like banking as well. And this is kind of a unique experience that children of immigrant parents have to deal with. And within school and within our lives, I don't think we recognise that often. And at times it can be quite empowering because you think, you've got this extra responsibility when you're younger, but at times it can also be a burden. And I think that hopefully we can recognise that today, and that can be talked about more for those who watch this. And again, one of the phrases I think about when it comes to this topic is the idea that you work twice as hard to get half as far. The idea that you put twice as much effort, you have to research twice as much because you don't have that knowledge available to you at hand because you have family members or people you know who are able to give that to you. I think there's also another topic that I was thinking about, the importance of educators and people in charge of school and being in school and seeing preferences as well. And this is, of course, a segue from this area, the last area we talked about, but when teachers have preferences in school environments now, it can create as well kind of unwelcoming and a hostile environment in addition to at-home challenges. And when I think about these kind of, when a teacher has preferences, and this can be along racial lines still today, and it can be quite nuanced and not always obvious in the classroom, but you feel it eventually. It tends to break down into three reactions when you explain this back to a classmate who either is getting this preferential treatment or has seen it themselves. They're either conscious of this racism and may try and exploit it to hurt and divide other ethnic minority classmates and use this preferential treatment, or they're genuinely ignorant of the advantages within the classroom that they hold. But of course, I personally believe that in this time, with Black Lives Matter movement, conversations that we have together today, this category is getting smaller and smaller. And I would just like a raise of hands. How many of you seen either of these two categories? Ignorance or people who intentionally exploit divisions within your classroom based on racial lines? Raise your hands if you do or not. Yeah. So I think the hands speak for themselves. And then the third category, which I think is more hopeful, and I think Natasha was trying to recommend me to do this because we need a bit of hope recently, and even more so today. it's people who are actively trying to understand your perspective and prevent these issues from perpetuating. I have seen this crucially from adults and decision makers within our community. And that's why I think it's important that we have engagement not only from young people, not only from adults, but also from young people as well, who drive this change and of course make that change possible through working with adults. One of the examples I have to mind is being head boy at Sutton Grammar. We added further stages to the selection process for the head student team. It gave us an opportunity as students ourselves to be able to directly assess students who would be selected and aim to combat unconscious bias, mirroring the teachers involved in the process. Overall, this led to a smaller but more diverse head student team, ethnically, but also valuing differing personalities as well, which growing up cultural influences, of course, can have a huge impact on. And the other aspect as well is our feedback as young commissioners. The council are now working to create community guardians to be trained on how to create safe spaces in the borough. The young commissioners have been involved in choosing a logo and a name for their community safety projects, and I hope this too will reduce incidences of hate crime on our streets and will help in making these spaces more inclusive for all. So, kind of to conclude, hopefully not going too far over time, I hope that we can reach a society where we judge or we don't look at race as kind of with judgment or discrimination or prejudice, of course not, but we see race as something that's kind of empowering, that equips us with differing skills, differing abilities that are different to other people in lives and empower us into the future. And I'm pleased that despite the national picture and the kind of politics we see online, we're having conversations like this on what at times can be quite a struggle to grow up as an ethnic minority. I hope younger people here today who are of that member, of that group, can hopefully feel heard and understood. I hope this can be true for you guys here today. Of course, lastly, this is only my experience, and I'm sure there are many different experiences and voices that I would like and hopefully we can hear as well in the future too. So thank you.